Touch the leg and welcome to the 7th day of the week-long virtual talk series on 4 principal commitments of His Holiness the Great 14th Dalai Lama. This initiative by the Department of Information and International Relations, Central Tibetan Administration, is a part of the celebration of year 2020 as the year of gratitude to His Holiness the Dalai Lama. For today's panel, we will hear from Lhamo, a Tibetan nun from Janchup, Choeling, Nunnery, Guy Lieberman, social activist and the facilitator of meetings between His Holiness the Dalai Lama and the late former President Nelson Mandela, Geshe Namdak, resident teacher at Jamyang Buddhist Center, London, and Sharon Salzberg, meditation pioneer, industry leader, and New York Times best-selling author.
Hi, touch the leg to everyone. From the very first, I would like to begin by reciting an aspirational verse from a renowned text composed by a great Indian scholar, Shantideva. So long as the space remains, so long as the sentient beings remain, I will remain in order to help, in order to serve, in order to make my own contributions. Thank you. So before I start my talk, I would like to briefly introduce myself. My name is Tenzin Namsel. Lhamo was my lay name, so officially I'm called Lhamo. I'm from Janchup, Choeling, Nunnery, Mongot in South India. Right now I am studying in my 3rd year of Prajnaparamita class. In other words, I am in my 8th year of monastic study, which actually takes 18 years to complete. So these are little things about me. I would like to thank the Department of Information and International Relations for giving our nunnery the opportunity to be part of this program. Here I, holding this opportunity, is not because I'm an expert on this topic, and my English is also not professionally trained, but as a given wonderful opportunity to talk on His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama's 4 principal commitments, I believe this is a blessing for me to share my thought on one of the commitments of His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama. So 4 principal commitments: promotion of certain human values, promotion of religious harmony, preservation of Buddhist culture, and preservation of environment. Out of 4, I'm to talk on the first commitment, promotion of certain human values. While talking about promotion of certain human values from Dalai Lama's point of view, it comes to the point that is finding a way of thinking about spirituality and ethics that is beyond religion. Here, I'm not specifically going to talk about spirituality, but in ethics, about how to put ethics into practice in our daily life. His Holiness once said, ethics is not simply a matter of knowing. More important, it is about doing. So with this, I'm a little bit confident to share some steps that can make you easier to determine what are to be taken and what are to be discarded while trying to put ethics into practice. Just for you to have clear understanding of my talk, I've made only 2 points, and these are in question form. My first point, how to put ethics into practice in our daily lives. Second, is it okay to guard merely on the faults of body and speech, not mind? The second one is a very common question. So my first point, how to put ethics into practice in our daily lives. For that, His Holiness had thought of more efficient to share to us the 3, which were divided in some classical Buddhist texts on ethics, namely ethic of restraint, ethic of virtue, and ethic of altruism. These are divided in such a way that we can achieve step by step. As His Holiness said when he was sharing these 3 levels, each progressively more advanced and dependent for its success upon the former. And above, when I say classical Buddhist text, it doesn't show that I'm trying to draw you to the religious side. It has something shareable, clear technique that anybody can learn. And the 3 levels that His Holiness shared to us was shared just the technique of way these divides in some classical Buddhist texts. And this is what I believe. His Holiness also said, regarding the question of how to put ethics into practice in our everyday life, it may be helpful to consider the process as having three aspects or levels. And these are what I have tried to share you in above: ethic of restraint, ethic of virtue, and ethic of altruism. So every time we listen on the news, we can know that the human-made disasters, nations fighting each other, sexual exploitation, child abuse, and so many other unbearable bad news are still going on. If we didn't try to alleviate human-made problems by ourselves, there will be no other else. Since these are the faults that are created by the three doors of us: body, speech, and mind, and now it is for us to guard the faults of our three doors. If we do guard the faults of our three doors, and that kind of integrity we say in other terms, as I mentioned earlier, ethic of restraint. And about the rest two levels, ethic of virtue and ethic of altruism, depend on advancement of their former. Furthermore, if I say the course meaning of three levels based on Dalai Lama's point of view, first, ethic of restraint. If you deliberately do guard the actual faults of your three doors or potential faults of your three doors, mainly the first two doors are what you have reached on the first level, ethic of restraint. Second, ethic of virtue. You have already started to practice the above, and with that, if you try to cultivate more positive actions, not only the positive actions of body and speech, but also inner values of what you have reached on the second level, ethic of virtue. Third, ethic of altruism. If you get used to the second level many times and do become a person who can dedicate body, mind, or whatever his or her to the well-being of others, and can even sacrifice life for others, what you have reached on the third level, ethic of altruism. This is also what His Holiness said, the highest form of ethical practice as recognized by the world's religious traditions, and also said in many it sees as the main avenue to liberation or to unity with God. But don't worry, that doesn't mean that a non-religious person practiced the above three and now he became a religious person. If you think so, well, that is a superimposition. My second point, is it okay to guard merely on the faults of body and speech, not mind? This is a very common question. I also had wonderful opportunity to join in 14th Tibetan College Student Conference held in Sera Monastery. Many Tibetan college students were there, and also some monks and nuns from different monastic centers. So some of them were asking the same question. And also some nuns of OTs from a nunnery, they were asking this question. Well, my answer to that question is, it is actually individual's choice. Nobody can impose him or her to do so. But if you really want to alleviate harm we do in everyday life from the root itself, if you want to earn people's trust, of course the action of guarding faults of mind have to be considered. It is actually the main source of every fault that we do. As His Holiness already mentioned, the most important is the mind as the source of everything we do and say. So, my dear friends, I have finished with my talk. So before I conclude it, I want to say something. Whenever I have a conversation with my friends about His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama's first commitment, promotion of certain human values, about how to put ethics into practice, I feel like I'm the one who is starting to talk about these three levels that His Holiness shared to us. I would like to hear from some of you saying it is not relating to His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama's first commitment if you feel that it is not. But until now, I have a lot of good suggestions from our scripture teachers, from monastic centers, and from a nunnery, and also some Geshe about sharing these thoughtful, His Holiness the Dalai Lama's thoughtful ideas to you all. to promote certain human values. Last but not the least, I wish my little contribution of this can make people easy to find some ideas about promoting universal values such as warm-heartedness, compassion, tolerance, and contentment that will give rise to peace and happiness. And the tragedy we face in today's world, such as war, murder, theft, and sexual exploitations, will cease to exist. Long live His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama. Thank you. Thank you to all the viewers.
I first met with His Holiness the Dalai Lama in 1994, when Nelson Mandela had just become president of South Africa. I had been living in Dharamsala, and I was very moved by the Tibetan freedom struggle, and we met in that context. I had approached the private office to discuss the opportunity of His Holiness coming to South Africa and meeting with President Mandela and promoting the Tibetan freedom struggle in my country. It was an extraordinary time. It was very exciting, the whole prospect. And over the following years, and since then, effectively, I have been involved at some level or another with His Holiness's relationship with South Africa. He came 3 times to South Africa in 1996, 1999, and 2004. And over that time, in South Africa and also in India, I had the opportunity to witness His Holiness's view and expression regarding religious harmony and how he promotes it. I'm going to share some stories about those experiences, but before I do, I'd like to offer some of my own sort of perspectives on His Holiness's position and His Holiness's view regarding religious harmony or harmony in general, because His Holiness doesn't only focus on the harmonious interaction between different religions. His Holiness has explores harmony with secular society, with science, with governance, with multiple forms, with the environmental movement. His Holiness's view on harmony is shot through everything that he sees. So while I can share some experiences around religious harmony, I have to say that it's been the same same approach that he has taken when it comes to politics, when it comes to the freedom struggle. Harmony is his foundation. So on that note, I'll share one experience that His Holiness had with a Sanusi, Dr. Credo Mutwa. A Sanusi is something like a High Lama, I suppose, of the African tradition. There were only two Sanusi at the time in Southern Africa. Dr. Credo Mutwa recently died, but a Sanusi is effectively a grand master of multiple lineages of African indigenous traditions, mysticism, herbalism, and all that encompass the African religion in general. Dr. Credo Mutwa was an extraordinary man, very knowledgeable, and had written several books and was highly regarded in the indigenous medicine world across the board, not only in Africa. And we had arranged that Dr. Mutwa would throw the bones, which is an African form of divination for His Holiness. And in setting that up, we were making a film about His Holiness's visit to South Africa at that time. So regarding the throwing of the bones, I had effectively wanted to make a closed environment where it would just be Dr. Credo Mutwa and the Dalai Lama having this intimate experience together in a room where they could where the bones could be thrown and they could have this conversation. I really had told the film crew and any of the other people, or any of the other organizers, that this was going to be an intimate affair and it was just going to be the two of them. But when we arrived at the venue, and I explained to His Holiness, so you'll go in with Dr. Mutwa and we'll throw the bones. He turned to me and he said, no, please, come inside, come with me and bring the film crew. Let's capture this. You're all welcome. He didn't see the issue of creating this, he didn't want to sequester himself into a room where there was an opportunity for this openness to be witnessed. So that openness, that way that His Holiness is so broad-minded. I mean, he is the epitome of broad-mindedness. And I believe that he is that way because of a few things. One is that he is so deeply anchored in the Dharma and his confidence in his own experience and in the wisdom of the Dharma is such that he has no fear of any other traditions, and he also is deeply curious about the functioning and the systems that many other traditions across the spectrum of humanity have engaged in and have learned. He is, in a sense, you could say he's fearless, but he has a wonderful thirst for knowledge and an extraordinary openness. So in that context, where I had said, go and have this private moment, and he had said, no, you're welcome. Come and let's witness this together. So we crowd into this small room, and of course, Dr. Credo Mutwa, who is a mystic, is quite overwhelmed by the presence of His Holiness. And he didn't even want to look at him. Out of respect, he actually had said the words, I cannot look on your Holy One, you are El Shaddai. Now that's interesting because El Shaddai is a Hebrew name for God. So what's interesting is that this proponent or this master of the African tradition is using that term for the Dalai Lama, who is the leader of the Tibetan people and the Tibetan Buddhist world. I saw it in a context of poetry, perhaps, but what Dr. Credo Mutwa was trying to express was his profound respect and how he viewed His Holiness. But His Holiness was very open, and he doesn't get swayed by the devotions that people have around him. He has said many times that he is a very simple monk, and his religion is loving kindness, and those two comments really give him the foundation that there's this great openness and this large depth of wisdom and this awareness and presence and attention that he provides the other. So they sat down, we all crowded down on the floor because that's where an African divination happens, where they throw the bones. You're sitting on the floor, and Dr. Mutwa's protege is there, a woman covered in beads, and she's banging a drum, and Dr. Mutwa says a few prayers, and he presents the bones. He releases this bones from this little leather pouch onto this mat, and everyone looks down at the bones. The only one who can read them, of course, is Dr. Mutwa, and he's a very expressive character, and he looks at the bones, and his eyes are scanning, and he goes, like this, he gasps, and His Holiness responds, "What happened?" Right? Which was, and everybody started laughing, what happened? And Dr. Mutwa points out that there was a little wooden hand, carved hand in this pack of little items, and an ivory sword was on top of the hand. And he said, "Your hand, Your Holiness, stops the sword," which was a beautiful and from, at least from the African perspective, that moment when you have 30 or 40 items that you're throwing down, and how they fall, and where they point, and what happens in that display, for Dr. Mutwa and all that he represented, there was a beautiful signal that His Holiness was who he was, and that he was in the room with him. So I believe there were two things that happened there. One is, again, this curiosity, this openness that His Holiness experiences and witnesses, and his presence. And also, because of who he is, not only his seat as the Dalai Lama, but because of who he is in his presence, right? You could say that this kundun it gives others this sense that they are being seen in an extraordinary way. And again, that is not just in the religious world. It's anybody who's spent time with His Holiness, who's had a conversation, or who has even just shaken his hand and had a quick look into his eyes. There is a very unique presence and willingness to see the other. And coming from where he's coming from, the other feels very buoyed and seen. So in the religious space, it's extraordinary, because he really does give that sense of power and presence to the other. So I believe that, I spoke with Dr. Credo Mutwa several times after that meeting, and it remained a highlight for him. Then the next experience I'd like to speak about is in 1999, His Holiness the Dalai Lama came to Cape Town to attend two major events. One was the Parliament of World Religions, and the other was the World Festival of Sacred Music, which was actually his Millennium Initiative, 1999 to 2000, and every continent had a festival, and the festival in Cape Town was the African Continental Festival, and I was the director of the festival and liaison for his visit. So I spent a year in preparation leading up to this event. The Parliament of World Religions was a major event in that year. There were 5,000 spiritual and religious leaders that were gathering in Cape Town, and His Holiness was considered the spiritual dignitary. He was really, he gave that event a certain gravitas and importance. And I was aware that the Parliament of World Religions had this view, because we had several meetings with them leading up to the event itself and His Holiness's arrival. So I was aware and of their view. His Holiness, there were several events that His Holiness attended, and what was fascinating was that when it comes to an engagement with religious leaders, and when His Holiness was talking about their responsibility as spiritual or religious leaders, he took a very clear stand. He almost considered, he sees it that he's speaking among his compatriots, and that as religious and spiritual leaders, they have something in common. And to that end, His Holiness at the plenary, this is a talk to 5,000 of the world's religious and spiritual leaders in one large hall. And at that plenary, His Holiness addressed the audience by saying that the responsibility of the spiritual leader or the religious leader is to do whatever he or she can to resolve conflict in their community or in their country and alleviate suffering wherever they can. That is their responsibility, to unite people, to bring a sense of peace, and to be the expressions of kindness. So, he says, when there is an issue in their community or in their country, a hot point of conflict, they should go to that place in order to bring whatever kindness and presence that they can to lower the tension, to lower the temperature, and bring a sense of peace. And when they go, not to worry about the media necessarily, but just to go. And it was very interesting that he put it like that, where he was effectively saying, don't worry about the optics or the media opportunity. Don't let that influence you. Rather, go into the heart of it and do whatever you can to elevate or alleviate the suffering that is happening there at that time. Which was, I think, when His Holiness says these things, there's something about his tone and something about who he is that it goes right to your heart. If you're open enough to hear it, it comes with a sense of authority, and I believe that those in the room did hear it. So he saw the opportunity, and he basically said, just let's think about how we are behaving as religious and spiritual leaders. If we want to be the ones to bring peace and harmony to this world, then go right into the hot points and do what you can. You need to act on this. And to that end, he also came up with something which was quite surprising, which he effectively said that prayer certainly has a place, but prayer by itself is not enough. Prayer needs to be followed up with action, where you're in the world and you're engaging it. So it's not only left to the gods to deal with, that we have responsibility on earth, among our peers, among our communities, with our enemies. We have a responsibility to try and act in a way to lower the causes for conflict and suffering. It's on us. And that's something that, again, His Holiness brings a certain sense of pragmatism into the conversation around around how the religions harmonize between each other, but also their responsibility to their followers. It's very pragmatic. So even if there is a deep mystical or spiritual part of the tradition, it should not only stay in that realm. It should be brought down, and we are the ones to bring it down, to engage, to act upon that. Which I thought was, I believe, and with the comments I had heard from others following, was a very refreshing perspective. He wasn't coming at this large audience by saying we are the special ones, we are the ones that bring these gifts. He said we are the responsible ones. We are the ones who have to take a role and to be stewards of peace. And it was a very sort of frank and honest view. And I believe it was to some perhaps unexpected, but to pretty much most of the people there was very well received. So that was the one experience I remember seeing when he was speaking to this large group around what religious harmony means and how it's applied internally within their community and externally among multiple groups. We had, during the time that we were at the Parliament of World Religions, there was a dinner, and 500 religious and spiritual VIPs were at that dinner, and His Holiness was invited to give the keynote address. And I remember planning this event with the organizers, and there was this scheduling of what's going to happen at what time, working with the, with His Holiness's entourage and the planning of a trip. You're dealing with the VIP state security, you're moving minute to minute with an entourage and a motorcade, and everything's accounted for. So the planning was that everybody would be seated in the hall, and His Holiness would arrive, and we would walk in when everybody was already there. And this was an interesting experience to walk in with the entourage, and what I witnessed there was something that underscores who His Holiness is when it comes to how other traditions also see him. In a way, his endorsement or his attention or his presence regarding their tradition gives a certain, how can I say, like a certain sense of authority, a sense of value. Somehow, His Holiness transcends the different sectors or different religious sort of divides and transcends it. So how I witnessed it, meaning that they receive His Holiness as an unquestionable authority, right? Even though he's a Tibetan Buddhist leader, he seems to have a spiritual authority that transcends so many different perceived divisions. So as we walked through, what happened was, as we were moving through, many different spiritual and religious leaders would approach His Holiness to get a photograph with His Holiness. And slowly we wound our way through the tables with everyone jumping up in order to get this photograph. And it was what was the insight into that was how they truly saw that this moment next to His Holiness was providing them with this gift of His Holiness's not necessarily endorsement, but that they were together in the same room, and this transcended this whole range of leaders from different parts of the world. It was quite fascinating to witness that, and I think that again, His Holiness's simplicity and humility and spaciousness and attention and awareness is part of the experience of the other, and he is so what I would call post dogma, where there is not necessarily this the debate between different religions that he might engage with is not necessarily focused on what are the differences, but what are the common grounds, and what is this commonality between the different traditions. And I think he emphasizes that intellectually, and he also emphasizes that just by his presence, through his curiosity, through his willingness to hear and to learn. So, and once again, this was a strong case in point that so many of these other spiritual religious leaders wish to be seen with him, in a photograph. The final point or experience that I had was quite recent. In December of 2019, I curated and led a delegation of Palestinians and Israelis to Dharamsala to meet with His Holiness and to have what we called the triple narrative encounter, which was an exploration into non-violence through the Israeli narrative, the Palestinian narrative, and the Tibetan narrative. And we effectively were coming to meet with His Holiness and other Tibetan teachers and people in the political field to explore with the experts of nonviolence. So it was a 5-day tour, and we had about an hour and a half with His Holiness, and an extraordinary conversation, because coming from outside of the Abrahamic tradition, right, the Jewish, the Christian, and the Islamic traditions, which make up such a large swath of the world's religious community, His Holiness comes in with certain kind of fresh eyes, right, and can offer his view, not only from the Buddhist perspective, but from what he's learned from the Jewish and the Muslim and the Christian traditions, right? So he comes with these views and understandings, and what he takes things. At one point he commented in the meeting. He said, "But your tradition and your tradition share the same father. So effectively you are siblings. So it's unfathomable to think about killing each other as siblings if you say you have the same father in God." And so that view, that perspective, so simple in a way, but so sincere and cutting right to it. You share the same father according to your traditions. How is it possible that you could think about killing each other, in the name of land, or in the name of any differences? Simple things like that. And then, also reflecting that in their tradition, in the Buddhist tradition, from His Holiness's perspective, over 1 million Tibetans killed by the communist Chinese, and still there's a view of still the Tibetans take a view of forgiveness, right? Which is so hard for any culture or any religious group to grasp. But it's not that he's settled in this. It's a proactive approach to how do we arrive at a place of peace. Because if we go to battle, first of all, we're doing exactly what the others are doing. We're going into a state of battle, and we will all probably be killed. So there's one angle, that's the one. But the other is, if we believe in non-killing, and that's our purpose, in non-violence, if this is our position to follow a non-violent path, then so we must do it under the greatest duress and under the greatest pressure. We must hold to it. And again, the activists, the Israelis and the Palestinians that were with us in the room were so moved, because it's so difficult for them to be able to hear, to find a path out of this this continual friction, because there's so much heat on the ground. So by taking them out and putting them in the presence of His Holiness and having a very honest conversation, a very straight conversation about how we address these issues, and what are the causes of continual strife, the constant flow of killing and reprisals, is something that His Holiness spoke of by saying that there has to be somewhere that cycle has to be ceased, right? Now, these activists were people that already understood and believed in that path, but they were still sitting in the heat of the Middle East, right? In that fire, and there was still the anger and the frustration and the confusion, and so His Holiness's presence and view regarding this was a sort of like a settling, and also like wind in their sails. Many felt that they arrived in Dharamsala just exhausted with the stresses and pressures of being an activist on the ground with this, decades-long struggle, and His Holiness's sort of freshness and presence and insistence on kindness, even under the greatest duress. So that was something that still almost a year later now is still something that the activists have been drawing from. His sort of like position is perennial. He will hold to this view consistently, and in that sense, you could really tell that this is a man that represents a deeply peaceful and compassionate world, and that's his role, in a sense. His hand stops the sword. He is the expression of kindness, the epitome of compassion, and we know this. But he constantly acts. He wants to be present. He wants to be able to go to those places, or to those people to come to him. He wants the engagement, and he wants the conversation, and he is relentless in this. That is the Bodhisattva ideal. He really does embody this. So I will end with one interesting story that happened after His Holiness's first visit to South Africa in 1996, and we had arranged the first meeting with then President Mandela, and it had been a very complicated process, with pressure from the Chinese, with pressure from the others in the ANC for them not to meet. And we had managed to navigate, because simply the two men wanted to meet, and Mandela for sure wanted to host His Holiness at a government sort of venue, the Teenhuis in Cape Town, which was welcoming it was an honor. It was an honor for any statesman to go to the Teenhuis, and I think that was Mandela's offer to His Holiness, was to come to that place, so it wasn't some private affair. And we were the meeting happened, and then I asked His Holiness after the fact. We were now at the airport, and as the entourage is going through the process of exiting the country and going through immigration, I was with His Holiness in in one of the VIP lounges, and we were sort of reflecting on the tour. And I hadn't planned to ask this question, but it sort of just came out because we were sitting there and we had this time. And I said to him, Your Holiness, what was your impression of President Mandela? And he thought about it. He can sometimes, if you ask him, he will think about it for a while. He doesn't respond immediately. Sometimes he can take a moment to really collect his thoughts. And he said, I've had the opportunity to meet many extraordinary people in the world, religious leaders and kings, and Nobel Peace Laureates and great scientists, and activists, and I have always prepared in advance to consider their reputation and to study what they've done. And in almost every case, the reputation that precedes the person, when I meet the person, the reputation is always much bigger than the person. But in this one case, as I was preparing to meet with Nelson Mandela, who had the greatest reputation in the world, in this one case, his person was far bigger than his reputation. Thank you very much. I've enjoyed recounting these stories of His Holiness's engagement with in the space of religious harmony. One of the questions that I was asked in the invitation to recount these stories about His Holiness in by the CTA was, what are my recommendations for how to sort of embody what His Holiness's view is, and to try and see how this becomes a path forward. How can people act on the many wisdoms that we've witnessed with His Holiness? What to do effectively? And I think that if we, it's very easy to see what His Holiness, to understand his view. You don't only need to be with him. There are countless books and movies, that share with the world what it is that His Holiness's viewpoint is on all of these on these issues, in this case particularly around religious harmony. So if we had to combine that, what we understand from His Holiness's perspective, with the modern world and how people interact now, I would propose some kind of social media activation, which would be a commitment for young people, or doesn't have to be young people, but people from different communities around the world, to propose solutions and ideas to their conflicts in their regions, and to put them into a series of commitments that they would then package into either a video or a document, and send it digitally to His Holiness, and say, Your Holiness, these are our commitments based on what you bring to the world. These are our responses. This is our commitments. And to compile these commitments, I have found over the years that when I am working on a project that involves His Holiness, either acting as his liaison for his visits to South Africa and the responsibility there, or bringing a delegation to meet with His Holiness, there's a certain level of commitment and focus and sort of like uncompromising seriousness around the project itself. And I found that it gave me much more strength than I ever thought I had. So perhaps by combining as people's commitments to His Holiness and to saying, Your Holiness, I want to approach our points of conflict in this way, and sort of passing this up and sending it to His Holiness, that might be a fairly simple but effective way to do whatever you can to implement these questions of and issues around religious harmony in the world. Those are my thoughts on the matter. Thank you.
Hello, Tashile. My name is Tenzin Namdak, and I've been asked to talk about His Holiness, and well, in the context of the Year of Gratitude to His Holiness. And in this series of the Year of Gratitude to His Holiness, we're going to talk about the four main commitments of His Holiness, and well, about human values and promotion of religious harmony, as well as preserving Tibetan language, culture, and reviving the awareness of ancient Indian knowledge, so to say. So as I said, I've been asked to say a few things, and then in particular on the promotion of religious harmony. And for my own background, I grew up as a Westerner, had my university education in the Netherlands in hydrology, and then got interested in Buddhist philosophy and psychology, and that caused me to spend more than 2 decades in my life in Tibetan settlements. So I feel more or less half Tibetan and half kind of a Westerner. And so then that's a bit of my background, and now I'm based, after finishing my education in Serje Monastic University as a Geshe, as well as Gummitanto College. Now I'm a resident teacher in Jamyang Buddhist Center in London, in the UK. So we're going to talk a little bit about His Holiness' promotion of religious harmony. And this is a very important aspect, as I already noticed being in India for so many years. There's a lot of different religions living next to each other, and you can see there's a great need for that, and also not only in India, but also in Western countries. So in order to get more benefit out of these ancient forms of faith, that's also why I think it's important to have kind of interfaith, or to have kind of this promotion of religious harmony or dialogues, so to say. So His Holiness also has this great vast vision, and that's also one of His Holiness' main concerns in this life, is to also promote that, this religious harmony, and to recognize that most of these forms of faith or forms of religion, they have many things in common. We all want happiness, don't want suffering. And in order to accomplish those main aims in life, we have many ideas and we have many forms of faith. And that's why there's not one form of faith or religion that is completely suitable for one particular individual, right? So that means that there's a variety of human beings, a variety of interests, inclinations, and culture. And because of that, exactly, that's why there is a diversity of religions as well. So that's a very important aspect. As His Holiness always recommends to always follow, the religion or the faith of your forefathers. Even when I was translating for monks and nuns during ordinations, mostly happens around the Tibetan New Year, then His Holiness always made a very clear distinction and clear approach to the Westerners, saying that, always it's important to follow the religion of your forefathers or your culture in that aspect. But of course, if there's an uncommon interest in Buddhism or any other form of faith, then that step can be taken. So also in India, I said, is a very rich country from the point of view of faiths and religion. And Abdul Kalam, one of the former presidents of India, so to say, also said that every religion, they have many similar things. They have a lot of things of loving kindness, benefiting humanity, right? And they all walk towards a spiritual path or a spiritual stage, as he says, of peace, or disciplined, and being ethical and being wise. So many forms of faith or religion have a lot of those things in common. And His Holiness Dalai Lama also said that when he was in his when he was about 15 years old, he thought Buddhism is the main, the best kind of form of faith. You know? But then later on, when he went to India, especially later on when he's reading more scriptures about other forms of faith and religion, and then he went into India in '56. And then for a few months he met many masters of the Jain tradition as well as masters of the Hindu tradition, so to say. So then it's complete. He told himself in one of his books, Towards the Kingship, True Kingship of Faiths, then His Holiness said, I came back as a completely different person. So it is very interesting to see that a few months engaging with other forms of faith made His Holiness kind of a different person. And there's a reason for that, because in the most of the world religions, His Holiness says we have common questions. Who am I? Where I'm going to? And what will happen after I'm dying? Is there continuity of life or not? And then seeing compassion as being the guidance, the principle, so to say, in our lives. So there are a lot of things in common, and there are a lot of things that are also different. And that's also a need for the difference, because we can learn from each other. And that's also a very important aspect of this kind of different aspects of different forms of faith or religion. Because in the need of modern globalization, there's a lot of conflicts. And certain conflicts are related with culture, and some of the conflicts are related with forms of faith or religion. And that's, if we can help out in those directions, we can come to a more peaceful planet, so to say. So there are many reasons to say why we need these kind of forms of faith or especially this harmonious kind of relationship between the different forms of faith. So His Holiness, as I indicated, 56, he went for the first time to India and met these other forms of faith of Islam, Jain, and Hinduism. So His Holiness was very moved by that aspect. And then after, they lost the country in Tibet, 59. Then for many decades now, His Holiness is in this land of India, thanks to the kindness of the Indian government, being able to preserve not only the Buddhist doctrine and Tibetan culture in a particular way, but also to engage more with dialogues with other forms of faith. And then after coming to India for some years, in '68 for example, then His Holiness had his first real kind of personal introduction to the Christian tradition, that Father Thomas Merton, for example, came to Dharamshala and they shared experience about meditation, what time get up meditating, and what kind of meditations we are doing on loving kindness and compassion. And then His Holiness got really a very kind of first-hand experience of another practitioner in the Christian tradition. And from then onwards, of course, His Holiness started to travel more in not only in India, but also in the rest of the planet, and met many leaders of the different forms of faith. And then, as we say in Tibet, we go to India as the land of the noble ones. That's kind of how we describe India in the text. So that means that India is a very incredible, rich culture from not only Buddhism, but also from other forms of faith, if it's Hinduism, Jainism, Islam, or Sikhism. So that's an incredible, interesting place to see there can be an harmonious relationship. Myself, when I went on a pilgrimage to Ajanta and Ellora, then in Ajanta is mainly Buddhist caves, as you know, but Ellora has also caves of the Jain tradition, and of the Hindu tradition, and of the Buddhist tradition. And they're just next to each other. It's very interesting to see that in such an incredible diversity in a country, in the past, in history, they could really live next to each other. Of course, problems are there, even in India, but in the general context, there's an incredible amount of this kind of rich culture that actually lives in harmonious relationships with each other, which is very important. So that's a little bit of a kind of introduction, so to say, to the talk. And then, there's also, next to, what we just discussed, there's also kind of a need. Why is there such a need for this kind of religious harmony, or promoting that aspect of going towards more kind of, dialogues, so to say. So there's a need for these kind of aspects of life. And, because we're all wanting happiness, don't want suffering, and how do we accomplish that? It's by the power of, compassion and ethics, as His Holiness often indicates. And compassion and ethics, a very essential point, together with education. His Holiness visits many main temples in the different traditions in India, and then sometimes some temples were even more fancy than other temples. And then His Holiness always indicated, very nice temple, but you need education. So that's, His Holiness made a very clear point. Which is true, even with our own Buddhist tradition. His Holiness also made some comments sometimes about our own temples maybe being a little bit over the top sometimes. But His Holiness says education, because the education is what keeps that particular form of faith or religion, so to say, alive. And that's also true for our Buddhist understanding. If you just call yourself a Buddhist, or you call yourself a Hindu, or you call yourself a Muslim, that's not enough, right? In order to get the benefits of a particular form of faith or religion, you have to study it and try to put it into practice, and then the results will come. And that we can see in the embodiment of His Holiness, you know, of this incredible aspect of the Buddhist doctrine, so to say, of loving kindness, compassion, and wisdom. You know, it's very inspiring to see this aspect, and even without, you know, making distinction, that you can see that equanimity is really present, and that's really needed towards all sentient beings. You know, once we were at the teachings with His Holiness, thousands of people were waiting, and there was, as you know, in India, His Holiness has you know, he's the head of state, so to say, so he gets full security from the Indian government, and there was one army officer, you know, doing the traditional salutation with throwing over the rifle and saluting to His Holiness. And then in salutation, when turning over the rifle, his watch fell off his wrist on the floor. And all these people still waiting, so normally you don't pay notice to something like that, because this soldier was completely ashamed. But His Holiness stopped. Let everybody just wait for coming, but went down to the floor, got a watch, and put it in the hands of the soldier. And you saw the soldier expression in the face completely changed. You know, so that kind of taking care and kind of the equanimity towards all sentient beings is very important, not only on a personal level, but also on a global level. So that's a kind of need for compassion and ethics, and that can only come about by this education within a particular tradition. So His Holiness had talked often about behavior, the behavior of non-violence, or ahimsa, as we have in India. And that behavior is one aspect, or conduct, so to say, and that goes together with the view of reality. So His Holiness always indicates that we have to have this kind of behavior of non-violence. And why is that so? Because if we be harmed by somebody, we don't like that, because we also want happiness and not suffering, right? So by understanding that view of interdependence, that we all interconnected and that we all relate with each other, then based on that understanding, and based on the understanding if somebody else does something not nice to us, we don't like. Right? So based on that understanding, we practice kind of correct conduct or correct behavior. And these forms of ethics you can find in all forms of world religions as well. Yeah? So in Judaism or Christianity, we have the Ten Commandments. Yeah? In the Islam we have, and in the Hindu tradition, in the Islam we have, for example, the 70 major sins. Yeah? And in the Hindu tradition and Buddhist tradition and the Jain tradition, we have kind of the 10 non-virtues or unwholesome deeds that has to be abandoned. So the abandonment of those negative deeds is called kind of correct conduct. And that's based on this logic of the interdependence. If somebody else harms you, that doesn't feel the right way to have a relationship with others as well. So that's the combination between behavior of conduct as well as the view of interdependence. And that's not only true in Buddhism, as we see, but in many world religions. So in that context, there's a lot of common things. When you come to the view, of course, there are differences. Even within Buddhist traditions, we see differences, and that's good, because we all have different understandings of reality, and also on a worldly level, with the different forms of faith. You know, it's good to understand your own form of faith well, and practice according to that, and then later on you can discuss with others. So on a personal level, then your own form of faith or religion is maybe for you the best suitable thing to do. But that doesn't mean it's suitable for everybody. And that's why we have so many different kinds of human beings on this planet, though we're all part of the same household, but we have different interpretations of reality, and we have different interpretations about the mind, and some accept the God and some don't. So that's the importance of discussing those kind of aspects of faith or aspects of life is very important. You know, to even you can learn more from other forms of faith. Yeah. I've conducted quite a few introduction courses to Buddhism in Dharamshala, sometimes a lot of youngsters they come, and from different backgrounds. They're not really Buddhists or interested in Buddhism that much, but they want to know a little bit more about it. And then after the course, they come up to me and they say, "Oh, now I understand my own religion much better." And that's actually the main purpose, right? So for us as a Buddhist, the main purpose is not to make people Buddhists. It's people to people understand their mind and to achieve more happiness, more stable forms of happiness. So that's also not only true for Buddhism, but it's true in every form of faith, or every form of religion. And the more religions and the more forms of faith we preserve, the more beings will benefit from that. And if you see the modernization in modern society, especially in the Western kind of culture, and now we see the same thing happening all over the globe, including India, that the Western culture is taking over. So there's incredible benefit coming from external development, but if there's no internal development, then still something is lacking. People are not satisfied. And that's exactly why people deal with problems in life like anxiety, fear, also with the COVID-19 kind of pandemic. We see similar kind of forms of aspects of difficulties of life. Last year, I went to one interfaith meeting in the north of London at a school, a girls' school, and it's very interesting with representatives from the different traditions. And then after the talks, then also a few of the students came up and said, "What do I do with anxiety?" Young, teenagers who deal with this problem. So what His Holiness also says, my religion, my form of faith, my this, my that, that's past tense. We need education of the mind. And that's an incredible rich aspect we can find in all forms of faith. So that's why I have to preserve all these forms of faith and religion and connect with each other and see what kind of methods we can use to benefit society. And it can be in the name of a religion, it can be in the name of a form of faith, or maybe just on a universal aspect or a secular aspect to benefit a particular group of human beings on this planet. So then it's we have these universal aspects of forms of faith or religion to benefit society. Yeah? So on an individual level, we can say one truth, one religion. For an individual practitioner, that can be true, but on a global level, there's many truths and many religions, because there's many people with many interests and many inclinations. So His Holiness, even from the point of view of Buddhism, to make it more accessible for the common man, so to say, His Holiness makes Buddhism kind of in a threefold kind of division. We have Buddhist mind science and its philosophy. So Buddhist mind science and psychology, so to say, that's one aspect. Then Buddhist philosophy is another aspect. And those two aspects of mind science and philosophy are kind of universal aspects. So they can be studied or put in practice by any person, not need to be Buddhist as such. So it can bring great benefit. And then for those who are interested later on, they can engage in Buddhist practice if they wish. So that means that those secular aspects of any form of religion, it's not only for Buddhism, but other forms of faith, especially the old Asian traditions, they have so much to offer of mind training. And so much to offer, and that is really needed in society. We see even in the scientific world, if there's even fundamentalistic aspects of science, then the scientists don't really improve. Yeah? So take an example as David Bohm, with His Holiness considered as his science guru. So David Bohm is a very interesting personality who started, in the language of mathematics, and then proving, a correlation. This was one of the first scientists who could correlate the general theory of relativity of Einstein with what we'd find in quantum mechanics. And he only probably could bring that bridge of this interpretation of wholeness, that we all interconnected, because of not only his incredible intelligence and his really fundamental understanding of mathematics, but also his engagement in Krishnamurti. One of the great masters of India was mainly, schooled in the Hindu philosophy. And in those dialogues, it's very interesting to talk with a kind of traditional scientist and a traditional philosopher from ancient Indian kind of background, and then they came to amazing conclusions. Yeah? So in that regard, it's not only Buddhism, it's not only Hinduism, also Islam and Christianity and other forms of faith, Jainism, all kind of can bring so much benefit to the modern world, to help human beings to achieve more inner happiness. Yeah? We have external development, but the inner development is still lacking. So in order to help society in that way, we have to start with, become brothers and sisters on the same planet. And in order to have that openness, we can keep our own religion, we can practice our own religion in our own way with one truth, one religion, so to say. But when we go out and try to reach out, so to say, and help others, then we can step out of that box, right? And then we can help others to achieve states of our own form of faith or religion in a very secular, maybe, or universal aspect of putting it into practice. And that's also one of the reasons, in order to become in a more harmonious relationship with each other, then there's a need for having more structure in dialogues and interfaith kind of meetings to help and guide our human beings on this planet. So the dialogues, as His Holiness indicates, 4 main points that might be of interest or might be of importance, and that's have dialogues between the particular scholars, of the different forms of faith, in order to understand each other, because often we have ignorance. We don't know other forms of faith and religion, and it causes kind of mistrust or fear. So to remove this ignorance, we have to study, right? That's why education is so important. And not only own religion, but also other forms of religion. And you can see, if you study other forms of faith, then you even benefit yourself, as well as society. So that's, the need for dialogue between the different scholars of the different forms of faith and religion, so to say. And then also dialogues between general practitioners, as His Holiness had with many practitioners of the many traditions. So just sit down together or have exchange projects that one particular group or small group of number from one religion joins another religion and see how they study and practice. So you see His Holiness often engage in these kind of incredible meetings like the Kumbh Mela, where millions of people gather together and then being with all the sadhus, and sometimes His Holiness even dressed partly up like that aspect in order to get a little bit of feeling of that particular culture. So that's another, number 2, right, to have practitioners exchanging kind of general aspects of their practice. And then also you recognize the qualities of each other. And that's also a very important aspect of our training. And then number 3, His Holiness indicates as an important point for leaders of the different forms of faith to have kind of summits and to discuss things of world peace, environmental issues, race, and all kind of problems we're facing on the planet. So those dialogues with different leaders of the forms of faith will by itself not solve all the problems, but it will help as a kind of catalyzer, because media gets involved, and then people start discussing these aspects, what we need to help our human brothers and sisters on this planet. So that's another point His Holiness indicates. And then another point 4, His Holiness indicates to have pilgrimage, kind of visit each other's kind of holy sites. And then you meet a lot of people. And then by meeting those other people, you start discussions and you start to understand one's own religion much better. So that to summarize all this, basically what we discussed, these incredible forms of ancient forms of faith and religion, they have to work together to benefit society at large, and it can benefit society at large. And we can deal with this kind of different dialogues to see how we face the different problems on the planet, and we can see what is the middle ground between the different forms of faith, and use kind of universal aspects of those middle grounds to benefit society in mind training, understanding mind science, to get rid of this kind of mental problems we're facing of depression, fear, anxiety. There's a lot of good qualities we can find in different forms of faith that can help. Another way we can solve the problems, the big gaps between rich and poor, as we can find in modern society. So to close those gaps, with having more kind of structured dialogues and projects evolving from those dialogues. And because the harmonious relationship between the different forms of faith and religion, then because it's based on ethical discipline and compassion, as His Holiness indicated, then automatically there becomes kind of universal responsibility for each other. And that brings an incredible message to the world. And that kind of brings that we can live together as brothers and sisters of the same planet, aiming for the same aims in life. And that's very important to have it's grounded in this forms of faith. And that's also true for believers and non-believers. So there's also a great amount of non-believers on this planet, as you know, especially in Western countries. And those non-believers also, we can help with kind of mind science and its philosophy. So these universal aspects of different forms of faith or religion can be a great benefit. Yeah. So then to conclude, maybe I was thinking, I read a little book of His Holiness, a book on towards the true kinship of faith, and then he has a kind of appeal to the world, and this is a very moving and very interesting appeal. It says, of my fellow religious believers, I ask this: obey the injunctions of your own faith. So form your own faith and practice it and study it well. Travel to the essence of your religion's teachings and the fundamental goodness of the human heart. Here is a space where, despite the doctrinal differences, because there are differences in philosophy, right? We are all simple human beings, but we all share the same nature of wanting happiness, not wanting suffering. So, if you believe in God, you see others as God's children, as one says. And if you're a non-believer, then you see all sentient beings as your mother. So that's kind of bringing us close to each other. When you do this, there will be no room for prejudice, intolerance, or exclusivity. So that means this seeing the distinction between my and them disappears, right? So this kind of equanimity, feeling that is really needed. So then make the vow today that you shall never allow your faith to be used as an instrument of violence, because misunderstandings, me and them distinction, can cause to conflict. Make the vow today also, as it says, that you may become an instrument of peace, living in accordance with ethical teachings of compassion in your own religion. And then open your hearts so that the blessings of your faith may reach into the deepest recesses. To all people, religions or non-believers, I make this appeal. Always remember the common humanity that lies in the heart of all of us. Always affirm the oneness of our human family on this planet, or living in the same household, so to say. Let your heart be softened by the balm of compassion, reflecting deeply upon the needs and aspiration of yourself and others. Let not your differences from the views of others come in the way of the wish of peace, happiness, and well-being. So that's a very nice conclusion, maybe, to conclude this talk with this incredible, wonderful words of His Holiness, to bring peace and happiness on this planet, thanks to this kind of, coming together in different forms of faith in a harmonious way. And then we can benefit society in a much bigger picture. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much for watching. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Hi, I'm Sharon Salzberg, and I want to speak today about some of the implications of the term real happiness, which I find quite a fascinating term in both words, actually. I've seen that so many times when people hear the word happiness, we tend to think of something like happy-go-lucky or superficial or kind of saccharine sweet and maybe conflict avoidant, really refusing to look at our own or other people's pain or suffering. And I, of course, don't necessarily have those kinds of associations with the word happiness. When I think of happiness, I think, first of all, of a sense of inner resource. And that brings me to a contemplation of the stress dynamic, which is really a dynamic. There's the pressure, the incident, the circumstance, and then there's the resource with which it's being met. And we know that just from life, that we can be in a beautiful place, like rainbows and waterfalls and surrounded by loving friends, but we're depressed or we're frightened or we can't even let in, we can't admit the love coming our way from these other people. And so it's not a really pleasant experience, no matter how many rainbows and waterfalls there are. And we probably also know, either from our own experience or from others, that we could be at a time of much greater adversity and challenge and just the sheer volume of stress. But we don't feel so alone. We feel we are part of a community rather than isolated, or we have a sense of faith and possibility that we can take one step and then another towards some kind of resolution. Or we feel love in our hearts for ourselves, for others, we feel much more of a sense of wholeness. And so we meet that very same stressor in a different way. So that's the first implication that comes up in my mind when I think of happiness, is inner resource, which is so valuable. It is something so precious in our lives. I also think of rest, some sense of spaciousness or peace, not being so immensely caught up in the maelstrom of thoughts and feelings and occurrences and incidents, and not to deny them or to try to annihilate them by any means, but to have some place of rest. And this seems to me really important, because if we're talking about resilience and we're talking about being able to move through really difficult times, then we actually need some rest. And it's not equal to like laziness or just taking a nap at all hours or sluggishness or anything like that. It's like genuine rest. So it has a sense of like composure and peace. Being with fully whatever our experience is. And in that wholeness of our being, we find a kind of happiness. I can remember my very first instruction in meditation, which happened in January of 1971. I was instructed, sit down and feel your breath. Just sit and feel your breath. The normal, natural breath, as is taught in that particular lineage of practice. And I thought, that's stupid. You know, where's the magical, esoteric, fantastic technique that's going to wipe out all my suffering and make me a totally happy person? I came all the way to India for this. And then I thought, how hard can this be? And it was like, whoa, it was not that easy. First of all, something I discovered was that it was quite difficult for me to be with just this breath, because almost as soon as this breath was beginning, I was kind of mentally leaning forward to get ready for the next 50. I was very frightened. I was very wary. I was quite hypervigilant. A lot had already happened to me in my life. I didn't know what might be happening next. I felt I had to be ready for it. And so for me, in those days, balance looked like settle back. Let the breath come to you. I used to say to myself, you're breathing anyway. All you need to do is feel it. I had so much performance anxiety. It's like I'd never done it before. Settle back. Let the breath come to you. You're breathing anyway. All you need to do is feel it. So these moments aren't moments of avoidance or denial, but it's almost like marshaling our strength, tuning into that place of wholeness, of composure, so we can then go forward to meet whatever is going on. I think of this study that Richie Davidson did at the University of Wisconsin at Madison, where he got permission from the review board to invoke some physical pain in people. And this is considered a very interesting study anyway, because we use physical pain as the template for emotional pain, for heartache, for disappointment. And so we understand certain principles through working with physical pain, and that can apply in all these other situations. And one of the things that Richie found was that he had a group of meditators, people who've been meditating for about 8 weeks, and then a group of non-meditators, people who'd never done any practice at all. And he's a neuroscientist, so everyone was in an fMRI machine. And what he found was that the meditators and the non-meditators had relatively comparable reactions to the pain. Other people have found meditators have had a much quieter response to pain, but anyway, that was in Richie's findings. So even though they had relatively similar reactions to the pain, they were very different once the pain was withdrawn. Whereas the non-meditators, once the pain was withdrawn, was still freaked out. And in a cycle, they went immediately into a cycle of anticipation. When's it coming back? How bad is it going to be? Maybe it'll be even worse. I don't know. It could be even much worse. And so they never got any rest. They never got any peace. They never got a break. Whereas the meditators might have had, as we're human beings and basically animals, had a reaction to pain. Once the pain was withdrawn, the reaction subsided, and they could be with that place of relief, of being pain-free in that moment, of being relaxed and having some rest. Now, this is a crucial kind of understanding when we think about resilience. How do we go on? How do we sustain an effort? How do we manifest in our lives as fully as we possibly can? We need these moments of respite, of peace. Some of it involves actually taking in the joy and being willing to do that. There's so many ways in which really lovely or beautiful or interesting or satisfying things may be appearing in our lives, but perhaps we're so distracted we don't even take them in, we don't even notice. And so we're not nourished by that, we're not replenished by that. Or we may have these completely impossible standards about what happiness should look like in our lives, and it's not making it, because life is life. I often tell the story about this friend of mine who, one year in Washington, D.C., she was determined to get me to this area where, it's called the Basin, where there's a large concentration of cherry trees, and they all bloom at once, and that is called cherry blossom season. And so she knew that I had gotten there the year before, but only at night, because it was so busy, and she was just so determined to get me there during the day, which happened. We actually accomplished that. So we went during the day to this particular area, and I was looking at it, all these trees, and they're all blossoming, just these beautiful, delicate pink blossoms. And I thought, this is like an amazing experience. This is so beautiful. And then my friend said, oh no, it's past the peak. And I thought, oh no, I'm having a bad experience. Like, this isn't good enough. And how many times do we do that? We tell ourselves a story, someone else tells us a story about our own experience, and suddenly it's not good enough. And so again, we're not replenished by it. Or we may feel quite a bit of guilt. I think especially in times such as this, which are so fraught and so difficult for so many people, we think, I shouldn't go there, that's selfish, or I don't deserve it, or I'm too guilty, or whatever. But we have to look at how things actually are, because if we just get depleted and exhausted and burnt out and frustrated and overwhelmed, not only are we not going to have any sense of happiness, but we're not going to have that inner resource to be able to care about anybody else, to try to help anybody else, to try to serve in some way, or even to pay attention to somebody else, which demands a certain degree of energy. I think we can probably all remember some time in our lives when we were in fact exhausted and overcome, and somebody came, even somebody we like, they came by and started telling us their, kind of sad story, and mostly we're thinking, go away. I can't take it in. I don't have it in me to take it in. And so we have to really look at what gives us the capacity to pay attention, to fully be there, or more fully be there for others, to really care. In Buddhist teaching, the best kind of generosity, and for a minute we'll go to material generosity, because it's a more concrete example and it's easy to understand some of the principles. The best kind of generosity comes from a sense of inner abundance. And we may also know people who have very little by external measures, but are very generous, and know people who may have an enormous amount more, by external measures and don't have any of the internal feeling that they even have enough. And it's so hard for them to offer, to give, to share. And we may practice generosity out of a lot of different kinds of motivations. We may feel obliged, or we're putting on a show, or we're doing it as a medium of exchange, or so many possibilities. But the best kind of generosity is said to come from this sense of inner abundance. And just as it is with material generosity, so too it is with generosity of the spirit. Thanking somebody, listening to somebody, offering them loving kindness, something like that. So we have the intention to take in the good, because that will help build that sense of inner resource, that sense of wholeness, that place of ease and composure rather than wanting to acquire more and more. And from that place, we find we are practicing generosity of the spirit. It's not selfish, it's not self-absorbed, it's really important. And it takes intentionality. Many evolutionary biologists will say, for example, that we have a kind of negativity bias, that we're just wired to, as though we were still in the jungle looking for threat, looking for danger. That's what we will tend to notice. And it takes some opening of our view and some intentionality to actually take in the good and not reject it because we think we don't deserve it, but first to even notice it and then to allow it in. When I say intentionality, that doesn't mean force or violence or denial of what's wrong and what's difficult. It means broadening our view. And sometimes it means taking a few risks with our attention and entering terrain that is not untrue. It is true, but it doesn't tend to get a lot of airtime for us. A good example of that would be, say, a gratitude reflection. What do we have to be grateful for? And I always used to say, it doesn't have to be something grandiose, something magnificent. It could be something really simple, like we're breathing. And I used to say it like as a joke, but this is something to be grateful for, really. And I think that's kind of highlighted in our time. Many psychologists would say a very healing thing any of us could do is to keep a kind of gratitude journal, so that every night you write down 3 things that you're grateful for from the day. Or once somebody said to me, I'm going to find 1 thing a month I can be grateful for. And I said, I don't think that's enough, like, let's try to stretch that somewhat. So let's say it's 3 things. And I also say, as is true for me, this does not come automatically for me by any means. My personal conditioning, my cultural conditioning, my familial conditioning is such that I am so much more likely to come to the end of the day and think about what I can complain about in ways I disappointed myself or other people disappointed me. And in my days of travel, I would think of an airline always. But what do we have to be grateful for? It's not moving, as many people fear, from a true place to an untrue place. It's moving from a true place to another true place that usually gets very little notice. So we're going to round out the picture. Take in the good. See how it affects you. And one of the great things about mindful awareness is that we get to see for ourselves what brings us happiness, what makes us feel connected, what clarifies things for us, and what dims our vision, what has us contract, what has us feel isolated or lost in tunnel vision. Because those habits of mind, those forces of mind are different. One of the primary ways I would define happiness is a sense of finding a home in our own being. And this is not about pleasure, and it's not about stimulation, and it's not about certain experiences. It is about how we respond to different experiences. Where do we make our home? I think if you go back to the Buddhist teaching about everybody wants to be happy, this is what I think is meant by happiness, a sense of belonging, feeling at home in one's body, in one's mind, with one another on this planet. We long for a sense of home. And it's the force of ignorance that confuses us and torments us and has us believe so many myths and even lies about where happiness is to be found. But that urge toward happiness is rightful, it's appropriate. It's not something to be squeamish about, because when it can be combined with wisdom or insight, then it becomes like our homing instinct for freedom, and we can cut through many obstacles, and we can see for ourselves, oh, I thought that wrapping myself up in that kind of drive toward vengeance, I thought that was really strong. But look at that. Look at how it cut me away from everybody. Look at how tight and small my life became. That didn't bring much happiness. Or look at that. I always thought compassion was like the stupidest thing, and you're just going to be like a sucker, and people can take advantage of you. But look at the profound feeling of connection and care. That's so different than shutting down and things I've been practicing before. Look at that. That actually brings me something very beautiful. I wouldn't have known until I really looked and paid attention. So our superpower really is our own attention. It's our own mindfulness, to be able to have that kind of discernment about where happiness is to be found, where suffering primarily lies, how alone we really are or aren't, and the interconnected nature of life, which is the reality of life, that we're not actually cut off and alone, however much we may feel that. We are all a part of this kind of great movement of life, connected to one another. Now, the word real is also kind of interesting, because what we seek is real happiness. We seek something that will strengthen that sense of inner resource, something that will provide us the energy to keep going and to keep caring, and so on. What we do sometimes is with very temporary pleasures, is we cling and we grasp, thinking, I can't let this change. I'm so incomplete without this person, experience, object, whatever it might be. But everything always changes, and our clinging just makes things more complex and more worse, because everything will change no matter what we want. And it's that sense of resistance. No, I must keep everything static, and I must claim it, I must own it, I must be in control of it, is obviously not real. It's not reflecting the reality of life. So I was often teaching with my friend Bob Thurman, who's a Buddhist scholar, and he almost like his favorite word, I began to think, was the word realistic. And as we were teaching together, I think that's not that exciting a word, really, like realistic, how about like luminous or something kind of more thrilling or inspiring. But I really began to appreciate it more and more after a while and listening to him, because in truth, being close to the truth is the most powerful, harmonious, fulfilling place we can be. If we live our lives at some variation to how things actually are, to the reality of things, then of course we're going to suffer. It's like the proverbial banging your head against the wall. We're going to suffer, we're going to cause suffering, which will then cause more suffering for ourselves. And so we come to a place where we want to be close to reality, even if it's a little unfamiliar or takes a little bit of daring to change views or willingness to see from different angles. If we can come closer to what is real, then we have all the kind of resource and the energy that we need to have our lives shift and change and come much closer to a kind of sustainable happiness. And so when I think of the word real, not only do I think of realistic, but I think of something that can be renewed, something that can be sustained. That is a home for us. And like any home, we don't live there all the time. We're not there always. But we know what it feels like when we get back home. It's the place we should feel the most comfortable, the most at ease, the most authentic, the least pretentious. We're home, right? We don't have to put on an act for anybody. We're home. And so to find those places that can offer us that kind of refuge, that kind of ease within is a very important ability. And the closer we get to seeing that causes pain, I don't want to go down that route again. Been there. Let me try this. What's it really like to practice generosity, to practice compassion? The happier we will be, and the more we will know how to renew or return to that place of happiness. Not that we will always feel pleasure, and life can be really, really hard, but there's something in us that can be responding differently, and that is what will see us through. It's said that we all have a capacity, we all have an ability to grow, to change, to learn, to connect, to love, to see clearly. And it's like a seed, it's like a potential or a capacity inside of us. And it may be, and usually is, more covered over or hard to find, hard to trust, but it's there. It's there unbroken. No matter what we may go through, no matter what we may have gone through, as a capacity, as a kind of seed form, it is absolutely there. And so when we undertake a practice like meditation practice, it's on that basis. We're not trying to get something from nothing, but we are cultivating and bringing life to and helping flourish the capacity, the ability that we already have. I can remember in 1979, when His Holiness the Dalai Lama came to visit the retreat center, I had helped co-found the Insight Meditation Society, which is in Barre, Massachusetts. And at that point in time, Bob Thurman was in Amherst as a professor, which is maybe like 40 minutes away, and he invited His Holiness to come to teach in Amherst. And so we were very young and very naive, and we dashed off a letter to the private office and said, well, we're a Buddhist center too, maybe you'd like to come here. And it turned out he came. We got a letter saying he was going to come. So, we had to arrange security. I mean, it was quite a thing, and of course, quite an honor, an amazing possibility for us. And His Holiness came, and we offered him lunch, and we had a retreat that was ongoing in the meditation hall anyway. So we invited him to come and give a talk, which he agreed to. And so he went into the meditation hall, and the retreat had been going on for, let's say, about 2 weeks, something like that. And the retreats at our center are very kind of intensive immersion experiences into meditation practice. So His Holiness gave a talk, and then he asked for questions. And this young man raised his hand, and he said something like, I've been at it for 2 weeks. I've decided I can't do it. Like, I don't have a capacity inside to grow. I can't learn anything. I can't do it right. I'm just so discouraged, and I don't see any way out. I don't see any way this is going to change. And His Holiness looked a little bit startled even, and then he said, well, you're just wrong. You're just wrong. And I actually looked up the transcript of the talk for something to make sure he actually did say that. And that's what he said. Well, you're just wrong. It was like incredulous. Like, how can you think of yourself that way? I mean, it's one thing to say I mess up constantly. It's another thing to say I don't have the capacity, I don't have the ability to be different. And it was kind of startling. Like, well, you're just wrong, because everybody is said to have this capacity to connect, to care, to grow, to change. That's reality. That's not something fanciful or made up. But it's not enough that it's just some kind of latent capacity. We have to bring it to life. We have to realize it in a variety of ways, through our actions, through our practice, and so on. So I remember, because the retreat was ongoing, it was a lot longer than 2 weeks, meeting with a young man, and he was quite heartened by it all, like, oh yeah, maybe there is that basis within me that can lead itself to moving on, and to not being exactly the person I was last year forevermore, and to utilize that other side of change. Change is such a complex notion. It involves poignancy and letting go, and realization that we can't hold on to anything, and it also involves beginnings and arisings and creativity and things like that. And so being able to tune into that side of change was very encouraging for him, just step by step, to have that be onward leading as we look at everything within the realm of our experience. So what's real? It's all got a kind of reality. Like the pleasure that we experience with a nice experience is definitely real, and it's not to be discounted or disregarded, but it's very fleeting. It's really mutable and changing. So if that's our most significant sense of happiness, we're sunk, because we are completely dependent on things breaking our way, and not moving from there. And that's so unlikely that something is finally going to come around that will be a true totem against change. It's like a totem against death. It's not going to happen. We can allow ourselves to really be nourished and open to the joy and the wonder and the delight that comes our way. We can explore. We may have been taught our whole lives that being selfish and uptight and miserly is really the way to be safe and happy. We can both take a look at the reality of those experiences, because we can just bring them up, and we can experiment. Like, what's it like when I practice material generosity? What's it like when I practice generosity of the spirit, when I thank somebody that I normally might take for granted? When I listen to somebody, even when I don't find them that riveting, what's it like when I care, when I offer compassion and loving kindness to someone who's clearly struggling? What's it like when I make a point of paying attention rather than ignoring or looking through the people who may not have such a significant role in my life? And if we're willing to make that kind of experiment and discover what's real, what actually opens us, what frees us from conditioning, what contracts us and imprisons us, then we have, in a way, our own very real, personal, direct recipe for a great deal of happiness, which will serve us and allow us to serve others. So thank you. May we all pursue a path of greater strength, happiness, and peace.